Okay, we have our last presentation for today. It's Kathryn and Robert, and they're going to talk about literature circles. So please give them a warm welcome. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Rowland.
And I'm Katie Sommerlott.
Okay, and hope that you find this presentation informative. And it may not be directly applicable to everyone's teaching situation, but hopefully you find something interesting that you can take home.
Okay, basically a very, very quick start. Why would you use literature in a classroom? Simply put, it's authentic material that you're giving them as input. It increases language and literacy. It allows them to connect their real life with common themes, things that everyone understands, the real life, the real world, and it gives them a chance to really gain some cultural awareness that they might not have. In particular, our students are high schoolers and they're in the high school bubble of I'm a teenager and nothing else exists outside of me. So it's always good to give them a globalized perspective a little bit on their life. And lastly, literature allows students to make their learning relevant and meaningful. So this is kind of why we use literature, and then specifically, what are literature circles? You might not have heard this term before. There is quite a bit of research, but it's not often in the EFL context. It's in the native context. So simply put, a literature circle is a collaborative discussion activity that combines close reading or intensive reading with fluency building or extensive reading. Basically, the point is you have a small group of students. They are all reading the same book. They go home, they read the book, or they read a chapter. They come in, and then they discuss it in English. So that's what a literature circle is. Basically, here are some very short explanations. It's an activity that builds and creates meaning. This quote I always really liked. So a way for students to practice reading, writing, conversing, listening, and interpreting. It's a fully integrated activity that you can use. And we use them because it's an integrated skills. It's a chance to directly practice the language that they are learning. It's collaborative, and perhaps one of the most important things, it's almost completely student-initiated questions and choices. Our role starts as a facilitator and ends being, I'm here watching your time because I have nothing to do with what you are doing in class today. It's completely student-generated. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So before we talk about what we actually did with literature circles, how it was designed, and what kind of activities were involved, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our context. Katie and I, Kathryn and I, we teach together in a private high school in Shibuya. There are several different programs per grade. Some of them are English-focused, some of them are science-focused, others are just generally academic-focused. The class that we chose for this particular project was an English program with advanced placement. This means basically that the students are receiving around 10 hours a week of English instruction. 4 to 5 of them are with the Japanese teachers of English, the JTEs. They do sort of grammar translation, the traditional Japanese classroom methods to prepare them for exams. And then the other 5 or 6 classes are with the native English teachers, which are taught with, how do I put this kindly, more modern theories and methods of TESOL. And we taught 2 different homerooms of 38 students each, which a wall divided the room in half, and we had 19 students on either side of the wall. So our class sizes were about 19 each. Last year, if you're wondering what all these beautiful pictures are from, these are actually taken directly from the book that we used to teach literature circles, which was Oliver Twist. It's a graded reader. It's a Black Cat graded reader. It's about B1, A2 level on the Sefer scale, so not particularly challenging, but it reads more naturally than a lot of graded readers do. Last year, the students were given booklets full of reading comprehension questions and vocabulary activities and short writing responses. They came into the classroom with a book. Maybe they'd read, maybe they hadn't. here's your booklet, answer the questions, check with a friend, check in front of the class, circle the answers, and move on, chapter by chapter, until the whole book is finished. The students were, according to the teachers who taught last year, the students were sluggish, disengaged with the material. They did not relate with the characters. They couldn't connect the story to their everyday life, and if you asked them what had happened about the chapter before on any given day, they wouldn't have been able to answer you. Again, there were no in-depth critical thinking, focused writing responses, character analyses, order of events, and most importantly for us, no oral or discussion aspects, so students did not have a theater for sharing ideas and sharing experiences.
Okay, so I actually taught the program last year, and the students were bored, I was bored, those reading classes were a drag to get through. They did not care, they did not know what we were doing. So I pushed for change to change the way we teach the novel. And we wanted to incorporate more critical thinking skills. I mean, critical thinking is so important, especially for language learning. They can change their attitude, they can reflect on their own learning strategies, which is a really amazing way to get them to look at how they learn. They get to question and interpret the materials on their own, and higher critical thinking skills lead to higher language acquisition. So on all scales, it's just better to put more critical thinking into something like this. So we decided to try out literature circles. With this, we wrote up a proposal, and we decided to stick with the same book because it's graded for their level. It was an appropriate text to be using. It gave them kind of a relevant historical and social aspect to it that we talk about later with the presentation, so we decided to keep that. And we wanted to integrate the skills as much as possible with the reading section.
You can see the first page of the proposal
Yes.
that we gave to administration has been included on the front of the booklet. The objectives,
Which are here.
if you're going to...
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Students will engage with the text in meaningful ways through group discussions, text analyses, and character studies. Students will increase vocabulary knowledge through intensive reading of the text. Specifically, everything was in context. So all vocabulary they got was repetitions in context of seeing the word in use. Students will further their understanding of the time period and culture of the text through peer discussions and individual research. And students will develop and practice reading skills such as guessing meaning of new words from context and making inferences. Specifically, number 4 is the bulk of the critical thinking skills we were trying to get them to. It was at times a bit of a struggle. They're really unused to doing this. They've never been given a text before and been told to analyze characters' motivations. They stare at you blankly.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means.
One of my favorite moments was asking that there was a question which asked, why is this character crying? Why are they crying? And the students were just perplexed. They're like, well, he's not injured. Nobody's attacking him. Nobody's died. I don't understand why they're crying. And they, group spent 15 minutes discussing why humans cry. And it was a very interesting moment in the classroom. Yeah. Okay. Katie had done a research project in grad school where she found out about literature circles, looked at a case study, designed her own. And we thought about how we could alter the concept of literature circles to fit our context. So we decided on 5 student groups and giving specific roles to each of the students that rotate from lesson to lesson. Okay? And those roles, if you open to the first page, you can see this is the actual teaching plan that we used to teach the first literature circle that we tried, which was not with this book. It was with a short story. It was with a fable, right? So we decided 5 students per group. Student responsibilities are here. We're going to talk more about student responsibilities in detail in a moment, so you don't have to look at these so much. But we gave them a note-taking task, and we gave them a daily planning sheet with language. This stuff you can see on the following page. We have a list of discussion questions that they were to go through. We gave them some more directed questions to sort of get them thinking about the text and how they connect with the text and get them critically thinking about the text. And then on the following page, mapping events. Okay, and these were all skills that we wanted them to use with Oliver Twist eventually. After the first project test run, I mean, it wasn't a complete train wreck. It wasn't terrible, but the biggest thing is that the students had never, here's the stuff, here are your jobs, do you understand your jobs, go. They'd never been in this kind of classroom atmosphere. And certain classes that had certain, it's called the mood makers, were able to achieve the task. They were able to finish everything that we gave them. And other students who were less self-motivated were not able to. So one of the biggest things that we ran into in the first project test run was that the students just weren't finishing within the time allotted. A little note here, by the end, not only were all groups and all students finishing within the time allotted, but they were finishing with enough time to go back and review and discuss. And I mean, they really came a long way by the end. Yeah.
The evaluation procedures, to hit all of our objectives and also school-issued mandates on grading procedures, we don't have a lot that we have to adhere to, but there are a couple that we have to go with. Their group portfolio was done over 10 weeks. They met once per week. Their groups had a folder, and there were pages in which all of their materials were held. At the end, that portfolio was worth a grand total of 246 points. The groups were evaluated together, so they were responsible for their group members not doing anything, and several students stepped up to fill the voids, as is always present in group work, no matter where you go. We also gave them individual writing responses. They're very used to having rubrics with us. They see them every week. And every 2 chapters, they had an in-depth analysis of what they read and related to themselves. We also gave them vocabulary. All of the vocabulary we tested them on was student-chosen. Each week, they went through, said, these are the words that our group members do not know. They wrote them down on a piece of paper. We then took all vocabulary we tested them on from their student-generated lists. So they chose their own vocabulary to be tested on. And then they had a midterm, which included that, and then halfway through, they also had a small vocabulary quiz for that. The midterm exam, which we just had, included vocabulary, character matching, and reading comprehension section. And then their individual reading journals, each week they were required to take notes on the chapter. The top part should be, here's the new vocabulary words that I don't know, write them down. Second part is characters who appear in this chapter, any new characters. And the last part was what happened in this chapter. And by the end, they were answering the bonus question of what do you think will happen next at the bottom of their notes. So they started to make their own inferences. Okay, given what's happened for the first 6 chapters, what do I think is going to happen next?
Yeah. Another quick thing to notice here is that for the midterm exam, comparing last year's midterm exam to this year's midterm exam, for example, character matching or character identification questions went from last year, students scraping by with things like she was Oliver's mother, to this year, at a cursory glance, I haven't gone through and actually crunched all the numbers yet, but students having high levels of success with questions like, this person has negative feelings about this character. And that is never explicitly said in the book. But because the students have engaged with the text, because they've discussed it and have thought about it deeply over the course of 10 weeks, they are able to understand the text at this level without the text in front of them. So very quickly, I just want to walk you through each of the different roles that we had for these literature circles. Now, the roles page, this, if I'm just going to kind of fly through this, all of this information is included in this handout. So the group discussion leader basically leads the discussion. Very simple. Basically, the student really has to come to class having read the book, has to know the direction that the discussion is going in, is responsible for making sure that everyone participates. We scaffolded them at the beginning by saying, having them thank you and what do you think, and giving them skills to get other people involved. At every stage of the literature circle, no matter whose turn it is to do their job, the group discussion leader is supposed to support them. That's the group discussion leader's role. Next we have the scribe. The scribe writes. Okay, so the comprehension questions that have to be written and the event mapping that has to be done. The scribe is writing that, but the scribe does not do it by themselves because that is an impossible task. By the design of the literature circle, it's impossible for one person to do it. They need the support of the group in order to succeed. And the scribe, because roles rotate, students who are less active, less motivated to speak out will, over the course of 10 weeks, 2 times have the opportunity to just shut up and write. So this was quite beneficial for those kids. Then we have the cultural ambassador. This is the only role that required any homework outside of reading the text and taking notes. And what the cultural ambassador did was open the book and found something in the book that they could connect with, or that they thought was similar or different to something they knew in their life, or something that was Japanese. So an example is they come in and say, oh, Oliver slept in a bed. Many people in 19th century England slept in beds, but at the same time, Japanese people were sleeping in futons. Do you remember any other examples of?
There's a chapter where Oliver goes to a coffin shop. Japanese people do not bury their dead in coffins. So I had a student come in with all this research about coffins and how Western practice is to bury the dead in the coffin versus the cremation that happens in Japan. So a lot of what they chose was interesting. The first three meetings we had to prompt, okay, remember next week you have homework if you're the cultural ambassador. And by the end, I was not saying it anymore, and they were coming in with research on their own.
Now, this was not, we did not assess them on their ability to do this. However, there was a point in the procedure where the cultural ambassador was supposed to talk about it, and we were monitoring, walking around and monitoring. And we knew when groups were in their cultural ambassador phase, and you know, for the most part, the cultural ambassadors were stepping up. And even if it was like a duh moment, you know, like here they're eating bread and we usually eat rice in Japan, they were engaging with the text at a level deeper than simply pulling the information off the page. Okay, and that was the point of it. Next we had the word master. This person went around and collected new words from other students, wrote them down in English, and if their group mates were kind enough, got the Japanese definitions that they had looked up as well. About halfway through, we realized that the groups were making like 30 item lists for new words. And some of these words were unknown words for only one student in the group. So this 30-word generated list was not an accurate reflection, we felt, of the known and unknown vocabulary of each group. So we ended up having them no more than 5 per student go around. And that ended up generating about a 15-word list for every group, which would then turn into a 15-word list for the chapter, which they could then be tested upon. All vocabulary tests were given English word, English definition, because they read them in context, so they should know how to define them. And then finally, we had the character connector. And the character connector, very important job, was to take these character sheets and basically write a running character profile for every character in the book. You know, in each chapter, there are no more than 4 new characters introduced. So they write the character's name, what's the connection to Oliver, what do they look like, what's their personality, what did they do, what do you think they're going to do next. And every time a character appears in a chapter, they pull out the old character sheet and they update it. Okay, and that was kind of the last thing they did in their discussion. So this was a really cool project, and we haven't finished analyzing the midterm test results, but looking at their writing and discussions alone, the students, they really enjoyed it and they did really well. I had one student at the beginning of the year, after about chapter 3, I heard him talking to another student and said that, you know, my senpai said to me that this was the most boring book he'd ever read, and I don't know what he's talking about. This is so much fun. So that to me, you know, sort of tells you the value of doing exercises in this way.
Yeah, I had a student in her free writing journal activities unconnected to Oliver Twist write 3 entries about Oliver Twist saying, this is my favorite character, I want to know what happens to him, Miss Sommerlott, please tell me what happens to him. I watched every movie I could find of Oliver Twist to find out, and I couldn't find, there's no clear ending, and I was just like, what? You have a favorite character from this book? Are you kidding? Last year I couldn't even get these students to name characters in the book, so
yeah.
They really connected a lot deeper. And it gave them the chance to decide what's important. In this chapter, what happened? Why was it important? Tell me, okay, good, it's good. I'm not going to tell you what's important. I'm not going to tell you the order of events. This is your thing.
These are just some examples, pages from the book. You know, not particularly difficult text, but again, texts that are dense enough that they need to sit down and, like, you can't expect somebody to read this and just understand it. So it's kind of the value of these literature circles. Right, thank you.
How much adaptation, sorry.
No, go for it.
Literature circles said adopted from primarily non-equal environments, but here you are in equal environment. But how much adaptation or adjustment was required for you to make it match your classroom?
Not a lot. When I originally looked at the proposal, we needed to choose the text rather than let the students choose their text, which is generally what the native environment would be doing, and allowing them to choose what they want to read, and then have a circle about. Obviously, we had to do that. We couldn't let them, hey, I'm going to read, Pride and Prejudice. Okay, now, hold on. And because this was a novel project for the whole classroom, we did have to alter it so they were all doing the same book.
Regarding the cultural ambassador, that's probably kind of the same for the native level environment as what you have here.
Yeah.
The only new role really was the vocabulary master, and that was, again, just to get them thinking about what they understand and what they don't understand.
Purely EFL
Yeah.
vocabulary, what don't you know? Yeah.
Two questions, if you don't mind. First was this the only thing you guys worked on for the class for the whole semester then?
No,
No,
No, okay.
this was 1 day a week. We see them 5 days.
one out of 5 classes was it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Second question was, I know you have a lot of, obviously, character sheets and stuff like that. Who was responsible for keeping materials like character sheets and things like that? Was there group folders that you guys
It was a
kept?
group folder, and we took them after every class.
Okay.
We went to the Hyakuen shop and we got a binder that had 10 sleeves in it, and there are 10 chapters in the book. It was meant to be.
So each group was responsible for naming their group, and at the end of the class, that went back to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't trust them not to lose it.
Thank you very much.
So what was the level of the student, like advanced, intermediate?
We were trying to find GTEC scores for our classes, and we couldn't actually find those. They are advanced placement. They are pulled from the general English course classes because of their overall grades in all subjects. I would say I have a quarter of my class is half Japanese of some kind. We have a very large international kind of mixed student background, but their English level is nowhere. There's not really a
It's all
level,
over the
but I
place.
would say intermediate at the highest.
The biggest thing to note about these kids is because they are advanced placement, it's a very competitive environment, and if they do not do well in advanced placement, they will be dropped out of advanced placement into the lower track the following year. So all students have a naturally higher level of motivation towards their studies. So they really, even if it's just one word, they are really trying to engage in this discussion for their own sake.
Is this complex, the context advanced placement, is that the same as the ETJ, the American Advanced Placement, where at the end of the year they're allowed to take a college level class?
I just kind of use that as a
Okay,
term
so-
that Americans would usually understand. There's no test for it.
Okay.
It just means that they are academically higher than their peers. So the school just pulls them into more challenging classes.
Right.
Cool.
And the reason that they get higher grades are, obviously natural intelligence, but some kids, because they're motivated, they just work harder than other kids. Some kids, because it isn't average across all scores, they have stellar math and science scores, but maybe their humanities scores aren't so well. So really, it really is kind of all over the place.
I've got 2 questions as well. How do you make the group? So how do you designate who is the ambassador?
Those were the groups were carefully crafted. Specifically, I would say high student, low student, those go in first. And the middle students, I filled in the gaps. So there was always one high student. By this point in second semester, we know our students, we know what they're achieving. So that was to balance it. And then we just picked the first run through. Okay, this student is going to speak the most naturally. You're the first group leader, but that role rotates through everyone.
So every chapter, all roles shift once to the left, if you want to go with that
Yeah,
terminology.
there's a list
On
here
this
how
page,
it
it's
goes.
the group discussion leader becomes the scribe becomes the cultural ambassador, and so on. There are 5 roles, 10 chapters. Each student has an opportunity to perform each role twice.
And also, they're discussing
Yes.
in Japanese.
In English.
Really?
Usually I have a rule in my class: if you can't do it in Japanese, you can't do it. So even if they have to use the restroom, they have to be able to ask in English. So every day on the board, I'd be like, "What's our rule? What's our rule?" And they're like, "No Japanese." So you throw it in there. So sometimes they're sitting there going.
Yeah. But-
they can't come up with it, but we kept it in English.
Right, we gave them some helpful English that they didn't actually end up using. We didn't have an example of the discussion questions on here, but the discussion questions basically read the discussion question, what do you think? And then they open the book and they say, okay, so for example, who took the handkerchief from the old man? And they open the book and they say, Dodger put his hand in the old man's pocket and pulled out the lovely handkerchief. Dodger took the old man's handkerchief. You know, and it basically, I mean, all the language that they need is in what they have. It's just a matter of whether or not they can find it.
Noticed you guys have 19 students in each of your classes?
Yes.
So that begs the question,
There was
what
one
happens
before.
with the,
The group before, the group discussion leader and the cultural ambassador roles were combined. We had varying degrees of success with the groups of 4. Unfortunately, one of mine, I very incorrectly chose students that I thought would be good in the group of 4, and it kind of fell apart, as happens with any class.
And
What would you do in the future? Would you put like all strong students in the group of 4?
No, I put my highest students, I took and put them in the group of 4, and then I gave mid-level students, or students I thought they could bring up into the group. It worked in one class, it didn't work in the other.
So the solution that I found for my group before was that I just spend more time hovering around that group.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if I see them scratching their head for a question, I'll be like, oh, did you check page 3 at the bottom? And they're like, huh? Oh, and you know, just kind of give them that extra push. All groups were given the opportunity after school on their own time to come in and see us, to work on their portfolios outside of the classroom context. They were unsupervised. They could use Japanese if they wanted to. Not many groups took this opportunity, but the groups that did were generally the four student groups. Thank you very much.